Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
There's none bigger, depending on your point of view, than the Brexit negotiations, the current state of them. Michel Barnier, EU's chief Brexit negotiator, just on his feet now.
About Brexit. In this negotiation, Ireland's interest are the Union's interests, and vice versa. That is why I said in Dublin last time, Ireland's concerns are the Union's concerns, and all Member States and EU institutions are fully united in this regard. At the same time, we know that every solution we will look at will have to be fully compatible with Union law and with the single market. Today, Simon and I had a very constructive and enjoyable working lunch together. We discussed the third round of Brexit negotiations and, in particular, how to take forward the political dialogue on Ireland and Northern Ireland. Our aim in the first phase of the Brexit negotiations is to ensure that the common travel area and the Good Friday Agreement, of which the UK has a special responsibility as co-guarantor, are not affected by the UK's decision to leave the Union. The decision to leave was the UK's decision, not the EU's or Ireland's, and we respect this decision. I said last week that while our discussions were fruitful, it's clear that a lot more substantial work needs to be done. In particular, we will need to continue discussions on all the areas of North-South cooperation. As this talk progresses, my team and I will be in constant contact with Minister Coveney, the Taoiseach, and their teams. Thank you.
Thank you, Michel. Can I reinforce all of the points that have been made? I am here today with our team, who have been focusing on Brexit now for quite some time, to reinforce the closeness of Ireland with the task force led by Michel. We are very thankful of the priority that has been given to Irish issues in the context of Britain's decision to leave the European Union. Ireland is in a uniquely vulnerable position as a small country that has an interwoven relationship with the United Kingdom from a trade perspective, from a historic perspective, from a political perspective, and of course we share the responsibility of a peace process on the island of Ireland together also. And so the decision by the United Kingdom to leave the European Union has potentially an extraordinarily negative impact on Ireland and on the island of Ireland. And so that is why, in the first phase of negotiations in the context of Brexit discussions, Ireland is one of the big three issues that there needs to be substantial progress on before we can move on to the broader issues of trade and transition and future relationships and so on. And so what we have done today is we have taken the time to focus on those sensitive issues, like how do we maintain all of the facets and content of the Good Friday Agreement in the context of that agreement being signed and delivered on the assumption that both Britain and Ireland would remain as members of the European Union, and many of the articles within the Good Friday Agreement are very clear in terms of that assumption. How do we maintain a common travel area between Ireland and Britain, where people can move between those islands, as they have done long before the European Union even was set up, and long before Ireland and Britain joined? And how do we, perhaps most importantly, maintain what a peace process has delivered on the island of Ireland, which is effectively an invisible border that is 500 kilometres long, that has more than 260 road crossings on it, and that has nearly 2 million cars crossing every single month? How do we do that in the context of part of the island of Ireland leaving the European Union and the rest of it remaining an enthusiastic member of the European Union? I really want to thank Michel for the detailed knowledge that he has of the Irish issues and the continuing engagement that we have on a weekly, if not daily basis now to try and tease through these issues. And we will continue to act absolutely as a partner and a member of the European Union, trusting in the task force to take our interests forward in a responsible and sensible way.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, we were braced for some questions from journalists. Perhaps they had them, but they weren't given the opportunity to direct them at Michel Barnier and Simon Coveney, the Foreign Minister from Ireland, who spelled out in pretty lucid terms there what some of the big questions are as part of the Brexit process in relation to that border and making it as frictionless as possible for people and trade. We're listening to that in Westminster. Ian Dunt, editor of politics.co.uk and author of Brexit, What the Hell Happens Now. Ian Dunt, a very good afternoon to you. There's Michel Barnier. Anybody, if he read, I suspect he didn't, but if he had access to the British weekend's newspapers, there was quite a lot of mud thrown in his direction over the weekend. Nigel Farage, the former UKIP leader, came on this news channel earlier today and said he feels that the talks between Michel Barnier and David Davis may be 6 to 8 weeks away from breaking down completely.
It's not clear. I mean, look, the press conference that we had last week was obviously extremely tetchy, and I don't think either of them were sort of pulling any punches in that respect. But it's very, very common that when talks ultimately work out, you still get moments like this of high tension. It is surprising, though, I have to say, that it's come quite this early, and it's come on something that really I think the British team and the European should have been able to see was going to be an issue, the divorce settlement. The reason it's an issue is very, very simple. Britain is a net contributor to the EU budget. So when Britain pulls out, it means that either countries like Germany need to pay more or countries like Poland are going to get less. That is a major, major problem for anyone to deal with if you're trying to run something of the size of the EU. And yet the British response has been weird. I mean, you would suppose that the British response would have been to use that as leverage in order to get a better deal in the end.
Well, they've tried to do that. They've tried to do that, haven't they? But Barnier has said, no, you give us the money first, then we'll talk trade later.
Well, it's interesting, you see. I think there's considerably more wriggle room in that statement from Barnier and those rules imposed by the EU than the British make out. It says that they have to be satisfied that progress is being made. Now, it doesn't seem that you would particularly need to sign off on absolutely everything to have reached that standard. And of course, eventually, European manufacturers will put pressure on Brussels in order to push things along slightly. But you need some kind of British proposal there for them to be able to come to this conclusion. So far, what Britain has done is basically to criticise the EU's proposal. It hasn't put forward its own one. Now, that may be, as the papers this weekend are arguing, because the Tories are afraid of doing that before their conference. If so, that would be a very, very short-sighted and self-interested way to proceed.
Well, I think they would say, hang on a minute, we've got the lawyers to look at the idea of the divorce bill. They've gone through it line by line. They've gone in front of Barnier. They've been given pretty short shrift, actually, from Barnier, even though they've approached it in a dispassionate way. In regards to coming up with ideas, Wednesday this week, we're going to have the latest position paper, number 12. This one will be on the science and how Europe works on science projects and how Britain continues to feed into that. So they will say, from Whitehall's perspective, there's been no shortage of willingness.
Yeah, I mean, they can put forward as many position papers as they like. The position papers have been of mixed quality. Some of them have been quite good. Some of them have been very, very bad indeed. But until they talk about the actual divorce settlement, it is much harder for them to get through. Now, the British approach, as you say, is basically to get the lawyers in and start going through it. This isn't really a legal issue. I mean, there is no court that this would end up at. It's certainly not going to end up at the European Court of Justice. Possibly there'd be a UN court that you could send it to, but by the time that you got there, you'd be in a protracted and really quite hostile dispute with your main trading partner at the point that you're leaving the trading bloc and desperately pursuing deals with other countries like China and Japan and the US. That is not a very good look for a country that is doing what we are doing. So the British sort of insistence on treating it as a legal issue is quite unwise. Now, there are other strategies that could be arrived at. We could say, we know that there will be a transition of about 3 years. We're going to offer you this amount of money for the entirety of the time up until the end of transition. Let's say it would be something like 10 billion. And that would at least deal with the EU's concerns over its 7-year period, its 7-year financial period that we signed up to all the way back in the day and which ends in 2020. Then, when all of that's parked, you would still have an ability to talk about assets and liabilities, you'd still have an ability to talk about pensions further down the line, but you'd be able to talk about your future trading arrangements. Instead, we've seen, yes, inflexibility and a lack of imagination from the European side, but it has to be said, an almost catastrophic degree of incompetence from the British team. And it seems like we're at the stage now where that could potentially start to do us real trouble.
Yeah, and just one final thought on what happens this week. I mean, in a sense, over the summer, the focus, the live cameras have been trained on Barnier and Davis in Brussels, perhaps the odd comment from the Prime Minister's spokesperson in Westminster. Now it's Parliament's turn. You've got Lord Mandelson in the papers saying the Lords are going to make mischief. They've got every right so to do. Labour's position has changed. We're in the trenches from Thursday onwards.
Yeah, Mandelson's right, actually. I mean, one of the things, the Lords are tremendously confused and varied and all sorts of things. One of the things they do very well is controlling process. So when something's going through Parliament, the kind of mechanisms you use, the kind of power that gives to government over MPs, that's the kind of thing that the Lords like to take and really sort of slice it up. Now, the government's given itself an extraordinary degree of power using something called statutory instruments or Henry VIII clauses in this bill, powers the likes of which we've never really seen in sort of the post-war history of this country.
With a sunset clause?
Yeah, it's got a sunset clause, but up until that sunset clause, they can basically do whatever they want. I mean, they can do it by ministerial diktat rather than any sort of, mandate from Parliament. So, I mean, extraordinary powers. You're right, there's some restrictions, but quite unlike anything we've seen before. And the Lords are very good at cutting that kind of thing up. Now, the government could have tried to stop the Lords from doing this. One of the ways would be to write down in the manifesto with some detail exactly what you plan to do. That way you trigger a convention that stops the Lords from interfering. They didn't want to give too much of their sort of Brexit game away during the general election, and so they didn't take that avenue. And that means that the Lords can attack. I think the same story with MPs. The House of Commons is pretty evenly split on this. There's quite a few Labour MPs, somewhere between 12 and 20, who would actually vote with the government, who are either Brexiters or who want to leave the single market immediately. On the government side, it's got the DUP, but then there should be, hopefully, 12 to sort of 20 sort of Tory MPs who might be willing to go over with the opposition and vote against. The numbers in Parliament look very, very tight in the Commons, and the government looks like it's in trouble in the Lords.
Ian Dunt, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Now, Theresa May is reported to be considering an end to 7 years of what's called the public sector pay cap, but which at 1% has in fact been for many a freeze or a real terms cut. This autumn, the Treasury will tell pay bodies what their remit is for next year's pay awards. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is in Westminster. Is there change on the way?
It looks like it may well be. In a cabinet meeting that happened after the snap election that Theresa May called that didn't exactly go as planned, quite a few cabinet ministers raised the idea that public sector pay cap had contributed to fatigue with austerity, contributed to the setback for the Conservative Party at that election. And there's been growing speculation since then that the government will act to lift the cap that's been there for 7 years in one form or another. And that was added to today when Number 10 didn't poo-poo the story that appeared in The Sun, saying that was what they were going to do in the budget. It looks as though not everyone necessarily will gain in the budget. It could be that in order to spread the cost of this, certain sectors in the public sector are focused on areas perhaps of lowest pay or where there are retention and recruitment difficulties, so nurses perhaps, teachers perhaps. There could be a regional element to it as well. So the government's got to be pretty careful in allowing these ideas to float around, that it doesn't get expectations out of control.
We live in a time when every week is a big week on Brexit, but this week especially.
Yes, we start the second reading of what for a while was called by some the Great Repeal Bill, the bill that brings European law in to British law so that Parliament can keep, dispense, amend as it wishes what we've signed up to over the years. A very central part of the entire Brexit programme, and tomorrow morning the Labour Shadow Cabinet will meet, and it looks as though they're going to decide to vote against this on the second reading. It's a two-day debate, so Thursday they start the debate, Monday next week they'll finish it, there'll be votes then. Key question, given the setback of that snap election, can Theresa May survive that very important vote? And all the signs are that Tory rebels are not mustering to vote on this particular day. They may form their ambushes later in the process when amendments come in the committee stage, but it looks as though she's going to get through with her bill intact through the second reading.
Thanks, Gary.
To Brexit, dare we?
Oh, yes. Yes, we
more
may.
Brexit talks. You don't have enough to say mocks the EU, is the Times.
And you know, Monsieur Barnier is now clarifying his remarks. When he said that Britain's had a lot to learn about the single market, he's now saying what politicians always say when they put their great size 14s in it. He says he was taken out of context. No, he wasn't. Patronising, irritating old fool. He just...
Was that self-description, is that? I mean,
just has to understand that Britons know exactly what the single market is, and we are going to leave the single market. I gather the Labour Party policy, by the way, has changed again today because the Shadow International Brexit Secretary, what's his name, that bloke...
no, don't help him. Don't help him.
Now said we
don't help him. Who is it? Come on.
Is it Barry Cryer, the comedian?
No. Come on.
Somebody else?
Come on.
I can't remember his name, actually.
Come on,
I think we should call him Barry Cryer because he's such a comic turn. The Shadow Brexit Secretary.
In truth, he doesn't know.
No, not Keir
because he's
the other one.
Because he's
the Shadow International Trade Secretary, the one who
Barry Gardner.
Barry Gardner.
Barry Gardner.
So he has said today he wants to not stay in the customs union, but have the benefits of the customs union. So this is a change. And we've also had, of course, Tom Watson, the Deputy Labour leader, saying we want to stay in the single market, probably indefinitely. So Labour's position has unravelled again in the last couple of days, as it does every day. As Kevin always says, more positions than the Kama Sutra.
But you are,
without the fun
you are,
and without the enjoyment, let's be honest.
You're just dribbling here. Right. Now, the story in the Times, which you're trying to avoid, is Downing Street and David Davis, the Brexit Secretary, want more talks. At the moment, it's a week of talks, 3 off, a week of talks, 3 off. They want more because they're falling behind. And the other side, the 27 other nations, say, well, what's the point of having more talks? You've got nothing to say. And the truth is, it's
Barnier, Kevin. It's not 27 other nations. It's Monsieur Barnier, who's an idiot.
This has been so badly handled by Tory boys' government.
No.
Because they triggered Article 50 in March, not having a settled position on what they wanted, and then you have a general election in the middle of it, and you come out of it worse.
We do.
So stop blaming other people.
There's a settled position.
You've created this mess.
We come out of the single market, we come out of the customs union, there'll be maybe a transitional period of up to 2 years.
What's the role of the European Court of Justice?
The Labour Party keep changing their position, and it's quite clear. The person who's causing the problem here is Barnier, and I suspect soon member states in the EU are going to become more and more frustrated because they know they flog far more to Britain than we do to them, and they'll be getting mighty worried that he keeps causing this logjam. We might
Tory boy,
as Nigel Farage said today, who does know the EU pretty well, he's getting
as an objective observer.
He said he's getting suspicious that people like Barnier and Juncker are determined not to get a deal because they are so frit that another country might walk away.
You're kidding yourself if you think the rest of the European Union obsesses all the time about Brexit. In the debate in Germany, Angela Merkel, Martin Schulz for the chancellorship didn't come up. Just did not come up. They discussed lots of other issues. Brexit wasn't there. It's important to us.
They did
crucially important to us.
They did talk a long time, though,
important to
about her utterly disastrous decision, which
Brexit
impacts on EU and Brexit on allowing 1 million migrants to come into Germany.
And may have impacted the vote in this country as well.
And in fact, definitely impacted
completely falsely, and terrible after UKIP and Leave.eu did their breaking point. Refugees coming in.
So in a sense,
when they would have known the Schengen Agreement, Britain wasn't part of that.
The factor that dominated that debate was her decision to allow 1 million migrants in, and she was very
filthy,
uncomfortable.
Racist
very
lies.
Uncomfortable.
Okay.
You can defend it, Kevin, if you want. You'd have them all here.
See, I told you we shouldn't open the can of worms that's called Brexit, should we? Anyway, quickly.